According to the lightsource.org, there are about 50 synchrotrons and free electron lasers in the world, and this is a map of where they are, and they're either national or multinational facilities because operating construction and operating a synchrotron is very, very expensive. For Canada, the one and only synchrotron is in Saskatoon here. The Canadian light source is located on the campus of University of Saskatchewan, and in winter it's pretty cold. Some of you may already know, but I just warn you. This is the inside of the Canadian light source. If you haven't been there. So what is the synchrotron radiation? According to Wikipedia, this is a pretty concise and accurate description. Synchrotron radiation is a electromagnetic radiation emitted from relativistic charged particles and subject to acceleration perpendicular to its velocity. So in this sentence, you can see three main conditions. One is you have to have a charged particle. In our case, it's electrons. And this has to be relativistic, meaning the electrons the speed of the electron has to be comparable to the speed of light. And the third condition is it has to be subject to acceleration perpendicular to its velocity. Like when the electron going through this circle, the acceleration is in the direction perpendicular to its velocity. So in most cases, people use a magnetic field to bend the electron. So when this three conditions met, the electrons will emit so-called synchrotron radiation along the tangential direction of its orbit. So people make use of the synchrotron radiation to do a lot of things nowadays. So people purposely build this synchrotron light source to make use of the synchrotron radiation. The light source, it has a storage ring, in which the electrons circulate in the ring close to the speed of light, and then we have a lot of magnet to bend the electron into the circular orbit. When you bend the electron, then the synchrotron radiation will emit through the tangential direction. So we build a lot of beamlines so-called to make use of this synchrotron radiation. Synchrotron radiation is a broadband radiation, meaning it has all sorts of wavelengths. Instead of in a lab X-ray, you have very narrow bandwidth, but in synchrotron, you can adjust the wavelengths across from far infrared in Canadian light source to all the way to the very hot X-ray. You can choose any wavelength within this band. So this is a very powerful. Just think about the synchrotron as a very powerful tool for your research. So what is so special about the synchrotron radiation? The synchrotron radiation is, of course, as I said, this is a broadband cover from microwave to hot X-ray, and the user can select whatever wavelength they want to use for their research. And another very special property of the synchrotron is that it has a very high flux and a very high brightness. Just imagine if you have if you need to do an experiment, and if you use lab X-ray, if you use lab X-ray, intensity is like this. But if you use a synchrotron, you have a 3-4 orders magnitude higher intensity. And actually, this is only the bending magnet. For the newer synchrotron, like a second generation, third generation synchrotron, the intensity is 2 or 4 orders even higher than this this bandmagnetized radiation. So you can imagine if you need to do a measurement in a lab, which may take a day, but at the synchrotron it takes a second, something like that. So you can imagine this will expand the scope of your research quite a bit. Like you can do in situ measurement with with synchrotron, very quick change of your sample, but in lab X-ray it's just not possible. There are some other property of the synchrotron, which including coherence and polarization. It has opposed the time structure, so you can even do some very quick measurement of the sample, and it has a high stability. So these are all very unique property of the synchrotron. And in general, you can compare the lab source with synchrotron. Just like a light bulb to a laser, you can all imagine that with a laser, it has a very bright and very collimated beam, which is it's not possible for light bulb. Roughly speaking, the synchrotron techniques can be divided into three main categories. The first one is imaging. Everybody likes good pictures, so imaging is of course a lot of the research they just use imaging to do their research. The second one is spectroscopy. Spectroscopy is mainly it is for looking at the electronic structure of the material. Spectroscopy. And the third one is diffraction. You will have a lot of diffraction talks in the next few days. So you may ask, like this experiment, you pretty much you can do every single one of them in your lab equipment. So why bother you go to a synchrotron to do it? So I give you just one example. What comparing lab source to the synchrotron, you can see the blue curve is from lab X-ray diffraction, and the red curve is from synchrotron data. Because synchrotron, it has a very collimated beam. Basically, if you do diffraction, the parallel beam is masked, right? If you have a very parallel beam and you have a wavelength, single wavelength, almost like a line like a wavelength, then you can get a very sharp diffraction peak. So with a synchrotron, you can see you can differentiate some very close by peaks, so that they don't overlap. So you can detect whether the structures very accurately. Just to give you an example, this is one of the data set from one of the beamlines in c.l.s. To access, this is not about technique. I just give you some idea, how to access the c.l.s. Right? Usually for synchrotrons around the world, we use peer-reviewed access. So basically, you submit a proposal of your research to a synchrotron. Could be here, could be somewhere else, and a peer review committee the peer reviewer will review your proposal and give you a score. If your score is high enough among all the proposals, you basically get free access to the synchrotron to do your experiment. For academic, anyway, commercial, it's not free. Another access is through the purchase access. You basically will pay for your beam time and services. The advantage of this access is it's a guaranteed beam time. You definitely get access to the synchrotron, and usually it's pretty fast. In c.l.s, we have so-called strategic beam time. which is geared for new users and some feasibility studies. So if you have some new project, you are not quite sure how, if it will work or not, you can contact us and we probably can try it out first. When you get allocated beam time, then you can either travel to the synchrotron, which I highly encourage because synchrotron, if you physically sitting at the synchrotron beam line, the experience is totally different. But again, some people choose to mail the sample or use a remote access. But this is available to some of the beamline, not everyone. So here's how you can access a synchrotron for your experiment, for your research. Now I'm going to talk about some individual techniques. First, I talk about imaging. X-ray, of course, X-ray imaging is because X-ray can penetrate materials. So you can use X-ray imaging to look at, just like medical imaging, like a so-called radiograph. So for radiograph, you look through the material, but the data is 2D. It's basically a 2D projection of a 3D material. So some people want to look at 3D structure of the material. So this is where the CT, the computed tomography comes in. So for CT imaging, here's the image, the synchrotron light or X-ray coming in, and you have a sample here. You rotate the sample while taking a lot of pictures using this imaging detector. So when you have a lot of pictures, you can use computer to regenerate the 3D structure of a material. In this example, we use a synchrotron CT imaging to look at the bones. And you can see when you reconstruct the 3D structure, you can see inside what is the inside of the bones. They have pores and fine structures in 3 dimension. We also use synchrotron CT to look at the composite material. The composite material it is used nowadays widely in aeroplane or maybe even cars. So it is constructed by you put down a layer of carbon fiber and you put down some epoxy, and then you just stack them together, and the epoxy will glue the fiber together. But how you want to know how good the gluing process is, right? So if there is some vacancy at the cavity inside of the composite material, so you use a synchrotron CT to look at this structure. And the good thing about this method is it's non-destructive. So you can look through the whole piece of material, not destroying. Like some other technique, like electron microscope or some other technique, if you want to do measurement, you have to destruct the sample. But most of the synchrotron technique, you don't have to do that. This one is we use synchrotron CT to look at the inside lithium battery. You probably know that inside the electrical car, there are all like thousands of this type of cylindrical battery inside, and some of them failed, some of them last longer. So people want to know why, and we use synchrotron CT to look through this battery without destroying the case, destruct it. And we can even look at the batteries in situ, because you don't need to destruct this battery to look inside. You can charge or discharge the battery while you're taking the data, and when it fails, why it fails. Synchrotron, because we use sometimes we use a very hot X-ray to do CT synchrotron. So the penetration depth, usually penetration depth is a problem for very high Z material, like a very heavy element. But you can see for synchrotron X-ray, this is only like an 80 keV X-ray. You can see the penetration depth is pretty much close to the neutron, which is known for deep penetration. So we can actually use very hard X-ray to do the CT imaging. And, let's see. This is one example for synchrotron, because it has a very high intensity. So people can basically use synchrotron to do in situ. Like when you pull the sample, like in this case, when you pull the sample and it breaks, right? You want to know the mechanism of the failure. Then you can use a synchrotron to basically do the mechanical test in situ while you measure the sample. So if you use SEM, this is usually in the past people use SEM to look at the sample failure. Use SEM, you look at the surface. This is the surface of the sample, how it fails. But if you use a synchrotron CT to look at this, you can look inside the sample and where the cracks started and propaganda. So this is one of the thesis, some images from the thesis. So synchrotron, because of the high intensity, you can do in situ measurement of a lot of the mechanical tests. Now I talk about some of the spectroscopy method. So spectroscopy, basically you measure some signal intensity versus energy of your either incoming beam or outgoing beam. So spectroscopy, mostly you measure the electronic structure of a material. At the synchrotron, the most popular spectroscopy method is one is so-called X-ray absorption spectroscopy, and another is X-ray emission spectroscopy. So how it works, when you do the X-ray absorption, you increase the incoming beam, like synchrotron, the beam from synchrotron, you increase the energy of the incoming beam. If you increase the energy to enough, like this is the synchrotron photon, if you increase the energy enough so that if you excite this low-level electrons into a non-occupied occupied band, during this process, the absorption of this, you measure the transmission of fluorescence from the sample. If you reach this band and the electron is excited, the absorption, the measurement, your measured signal increase dramatically. So you measure this intensity versus energy. Here you get the X-ray absorption. So when you have the vacancy, like the electron is ejected to an occupied band, when you have the vacancy in the lower band, some occupied electrons will go back to fill this hole, and in the meantime generate some photons. We call the emission. So this emission gives you some information about the occupied band of this electronic structure. So this is a very rough explanation how it works. So from this two method, you can measure the electronic structure. You can measure the band gap between the occupied band and the unoccupied band. The electronic structure is it's kind of like a fingerprint for every element. So element, if you measure one element, depending on the valence of this element, like if you have for example, in this case, it's arsenic, right? If you have like a 2 plus or 5 plus valence band, the electronic structure can be quite different. This will reflect in the X-ray absorption. So by comparing your sample, the measurement from your sample to some reference materials, you can easily identify the element. You know, what is the element and what is the valence. And sometimes if you really do a very careful work, you can even detect the local environment of this element, which is the next thing I'm talking about. This is the so-called X-ray absorption fine structure. This technique is interesting because it uses a spectroscopy technique to detect the structural structure. Structural structure, you all, I believe you all know some about the diffraction. So structural information, usually we use the diffraction to detect it. But this method can detect some structural information using the spectroscopy method. The idea is when you do the X-ray absorption, this one doesn't, can you see it? Yeah. So when you do the X-ray absorption, just like the previous slides, you have a electron, ejected into this unoccupied band. In the meantime, you will see a jump, very big jump of this we call the absorption edge. But when you continue measuring, you will see some wiggles on top of this absorption background. So what is this?
We have more buttons here.
Yeah. What is wiggles is for, why it appears. So this wiggles is from the very fine structure around this element, around this atom. Like this oscillator is in the. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. So if you subtract this continuous, smooth background, and you will see this oscillation. This oscillation is from the interference between this element with the neighboring element. So this oscillation will tell you how many other atoms are around and how far away. What are they? So when you take a Fourier transformation of this spectrum, you will get this. This is showing the nearest neighbor of this element. Like in this case, we measure iron. So this will show, in 1.5, 1.6 angstrom, close, far from this iron atom. How many other elements do you have? So this will give you the nearest neighbor, the distribution of the nearest neighbor around this element. Then people use some models to simulate and see if they can produce this type of nearest neighbor distribution. And it's a fairly accurate method, and people use this to identify, some very fine structural change around the atom. I think I probably don't need to talk about it. This is another example to use, using X-ray absorption and X-ray emission to look at the electronic structure of LED material. In this case, people want to generate some very special LED material to fill this crying gap, to make sure we have very accurate color rendering. So you can see people use this X-ray absorption, X-ray emission to measure the electronic structure of this material, and they hope to make a LED material which show this crying color. I'm not going to talk about too much about it. So I talked about imaging and spectroscopy, and you definitely will hear a lot of diffraction. So these are the three main categories. But in between these three main categories, we have many other techniques, which is even more advanced, more complicated, but tell you a lot more other information. For example, we have a few examples here. This, if you combine imaging with the spectroscopy, you have this, some new technique. If you combine imaging with diffraction, you have some advanced technique, and spectroscopy with diffraction, of course. Here is one example to use so-called XRF imaging for cultural heritage research. So these are the photograph of like maybe 1.5 century old. So you can see you pretty much couldn't see much from this photograph. So the people from some, I think this is from Canadian Museum, they brought this images to the synchrotron, and we use the so-called X-ray fluorescent imaging to look at we basically scan this image pixel by pixel. For each pixel, we record this spectroscopy, the so-called X-ray fluorescent. So when you have this different element for each pixel, you can generate this picture from each element. So here's this is original image. So we record this XRF image, and we use for example, mercury, gold, silver, copper. We use this particular element, the signal for this particular element, to regenerate this image. So usually, I believe this was a surprise. So like people were thinking like silver is the material, the element people used to generate photograph, right, in the past. But it turns out that silver doesn't give you anything. Instead, the mercury gives you a pretty good restoration of the original image. So this research was done a few years back by I believe it's a Western University student at the c.l.s. Another method combining the microscope with spectroscopy is called a spectral microscope. Here is how it works. The synchrotron light was coming in and monochromatized to single wavelength. We use this so-called zone plate to focus the beam down to, I think we can focus down to about 20 nanometer. Yeah, 20 nanometer. Then we can scan the sample with this thin beam. During the scan, we set energy to one energy and do a scan of this sample, and we change the energy to another and do another scan, and we do this with a very fine energy steps. Basically, when we finish this measurement, we have a step of pictures all at different energy. Then we can use this. This becomes like basically a three-dimensional data structure, and you can use this to generate distribution of the element inside the sample. We use this spectral microscope to look at the composite material in an airplane. So this is a SEM picture. If we use SEM picture, you can see the fiber and epoxy very clearly. With the STIXM, the spectral microscope, we can also see the difference. Like this is a fiber, this is a epoxy, and we look at the interface because for airplane the bonding between the fiber and the epoxy is critical because you don't want them to separate and fail. So we look at this the spectral from different region and compare them. You can see we clearly see some mixing like a diffusion layer in the interface, and we can even calculate how much how much each component is within this diffusion layer. Combining imaging with the diffraction, there's also a so-called diffraction enhanced imaging. Diffraction enhanced imaging, you can see for the regular imaging, we have the beam coming and you scan the sample. This is just like the medical image. For diffraction enhanced imaging, we put another analyzer after the sample, so that you collect the diffracted beam, and then it can enhance the resolution and the contrast considerably. Here's some diffraction DI imaging from the synchrotrons. You can see, the DI enhances the boundaries between the soft tissue. This soft tissue is very, very challenging for the regular imaging, X-ray imaging. But if you use the DI technique, you can see a lot of fine structure. You can see the soft material, even lungs, and contrast in the lungs, which is very challenging for the regular imaging. Cool. Another technique imaging plus diffraction is so-called microalloy XRD. So in this case, we can actually detect the materials. So you have, especially the metal materials. So you have grains inside the metal alloy, and people want to know the orientation of each individual grain, or maybe the stress strain of the grain. And we can use a synchrotron, so-called microalloy XRD, to detect, to measure the each individual grains without destroy the sample. So you can see for the microalloy, you use a white beam or polychromatic beam, and there are a lot of alloy patterns out of each individual grains. So how you know which patterns from which grain? One method is to move the sample to detect the distance, and then you can track which direction this beam come from, and you can backtrace into to the sample. And when you do that, you can analyze the orientation of individual grains within a material in 3-dimensional. Okay, yeah. This is some other method to do similar things. Also micro diffraction, but with different methods to trace back where the beam originate. This is an application of this technique. People use this technique to do some in situ measurement. When you 3D print a material like alloy material, you can use this in situ this method to measure in situ how the grain grows, the structure within this 3D material. The next would be the diffraction plus spectroscopy. I believe some talks in the next few days may mention this a little, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. I just want to say this is a very powerful technique, especially for some like in the past few years, for some high TC material research, and looking at some very subtle modulation, like of the electrons, spins, and orbitals within material, so-called quantum material. For synchrotron techniques, of course, in addition to all the techniques we have, I think we have maybe tens or maybe of different techniques. And there are some other opportunities, like we do have a lot of in situ and in friendly devices, so that you can measure the sample, the sample in action. And we have some sample environments, such as like a high temperature, high pressure, and magnet field, electrical field, and the electrochemical cell. So think about it. If you have some, like a measurement which you want it to be dynamic and subject to some special, like a high pressure sample environment, this, like a synchrotron, is a very good place to do that. This is just an example. Not long ago, we used a so-called spectral microscope to measure the in situ charging and discharging of a battery material. Thank you.
We have time for questions before we go to our first method. Any questions?
Okay. Yeah.
What's the special resolution for the text?
Which one?
I mean, how close can I go to make a 3D mapping of the XT?
CT?
CT, yeah.
CT, we have a fairly big sample to detector distance. I think it's 40 millimeter.
In limits?
Yeah, in limit.
Well, they can do 5 microns and better. It depends. They have combinations of lenses and cameras, so they can pick different resolutions, volume resolutions, depending on what you want. But less than 5 microns is common.
Less than 5 microns is the detector resolution. Yeah, it's, I think it depending on the detector. If you have a better resolution detector, it's another is synchrotron CT. Compared to the lab CT, usually you have a very close, like, sample working distance. Synchrotron, because we have a pretty much a parallel beam, so sample can be far away. So you can put in situ devices around the sample without any issue. That's one advantage.
And my question goes in the same direction, because I saw some interesting techniques to characterize maybe thin films of coatings. It is possible to measure for example, in the CT, the porosity of the thin film around 3 microns of thickness, or maybe to invite the micro-low XRD to reproduce the texture of a coating.
3 microns be challenging. As I said, it depends on the resolution of the detector. If the detector have a good resolution, then it's not a problem. It's not the technique. It's not a problem of the technique. Depending on what you have.
Okay. Because a coating of thin film, for example, a titanium aluminum nitride, have grains around, I don't know, 20 nanometers, and I don't know if in the facilities here we can like make a measurement that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say, like, if you have a nanometer scale grains, something tens of nanometers, I would say it's probably electron microscope might have some technique for that. Synchrotron, to be honest, like, compare synchrotron to electron microscope, the spatial resolution, the synchrotron is still not quite up to the electron microscope yet.
For nanometer size holes or inclusions, depending on the sample, you might be more, SACs might be more useful. We have the SACs talk Thursday. One other thing that we should point out, maybe some don't know, is that when you have a scientific case here at the c.l.s, you can submit one proposal to use several pigments. So in one proposal, you can request different techniques that together will come and complement your result better than only one of them. And then there you have pigments and pigment scientists. So for very specific questions, it might be better off contacting the pigment scientists.
Is there a list of the mainline scientists on the website?
Yes.
Yes.
So, any more questions? Well, you can always find Feizhou around later. If there are no more questions, we can go on to our snack break. We come back here at 10:20 for our introduction to powder diffraction talk with Joel Wright. Thank you. We should stop the recording. Yeah.